Today I'm going to talk to you about migration, or the movement of people from one country to another. My lecture is divided into 4 sections. Firstly, I'll look at global trends in migration. When I use the word trends, I mean the general direction in which something is moving. So first, I want to look at the general worldwide trends. Secondly, I'll cover the reasons why people become migrant workers, and I'll talk about their working conditions. Thirdly, I'll discuss the economic benefits and costs of migration. And finally, I'll look at the idea of choice in migration. Do people always have a choice about migrating? Well, let's start. According to the most recent report by the UN Population Division, in 2005 there were 191 million people living outside their country of birth. In other words, 191 million people who have migrated to another country. That is 3% of the world's population. The report also showed that most migrants live in the richer countries of Europe and North America, including 38 million in the US and 10 million in Germany. However, a surprising fact is that about 1/3 of global migrants have moved from one developing country to another. That's 1/3 of all migrants going to developing countries, not rich countries. Now, in the Arab countries of the Middle East, 80% of the labour force is migrant workers. That's quite an astonishing statistic. The major sending countries are the Philippines, Indonesia, Sri Lanka, Nepal, and Bangladesh. Sending countries is a term that refers to the countries migrants come from. These countries also supply labour for Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Malaysia, and Thailand. In fact, about 10% of the population of the Philippines, that is 8 million people, work outside of their home country. 8 million! That's a lot of people. Another trend is the changes in migration to the United States. Whereas in the 1980s most workers in the south of the United States came from Mexico, today they come from all over Latin America. This has changed Mexico into a transit country, a country people pass through, while it also remains a sending country. Other Central American countries, such as Guatemala, are also following this trend. Now I'd like to move on to talk about why people become migrant workers and what work is available to these people. Well, in general, people choose to migrate because they believe they can achieve a better life in a foreign country. Now, this is the main reason why people move. The decision to leave their home, which is often difficult, is triggered by a combination of push and pull forces. Push forces can be such things as the lack of opportunities at home, and pull forces, on the other hand, may be factors such as the idea of increased opportunities. Although there are channels, or ways, for both skilled and unskilled people to officially migrate, these channels are too limited to cope with all the people who want to move. Many migrants who fail to qualify for the official channels choose to take their chance as undocumented migrants. Undocumented means that they don't have official migration documents. So in fact, they are illegal immigrants. There are 2 ways of becoming an undocumented migrant, either by overstaying a visa or by crossing an unprotected border. There are about 12 million undocumented migrants in the United States and possibly a similar number in Europe. In Australia, on the other hand, there are approximately 60,000 illegal migrants. Whether documented or undocumented, migrant workers tend to work in jobs that the local population rejects. These jobs are often described as 3D: dirty, dangerous, and difficult. So when we say a 3D job, we mean one that is dirty, dangerous, and difficult. In fact, many migrant workers doing these 3D jobs are professionals who have to take on unskilled jobs in their new country. Another interesting fact is that half of all international migrants are women. Often they leave their children and families behind and work as domestic labour. A significant number of these women are hidden in private households where they're vulnerable to sexual abuse, labour conditions similar to slavery, and non-payment of wages. So we've looked at why people migrate. Let's turn now to the economic benefits and costs of migration. Economists have proposed that if migration benefits the countries that send migrants, these countries will become less poor, and so migration will decrease. So how does migration benefit the sending countries? The answer is through remittances. A remittance is the money migrants send home to their families. Now, the money that the workers send home is very helpful to their families and to their local economy in general. In fact, the global value of remittances is quite high. According to the World Bank, remittances to developing countries reached $240 billion in 2007, more than double the amount of foreign aid for that year. These remittances are often the greatest source of foreign currency for many countries. Of course, migration comes at a cost for the sending countries as well. Part of the impact of migration is the loss of skilled and unskilled workers for the sending countries. For Africa, whose workers are migrating in increasing numbers, the losses can be serious. As many as 20,000 African professionals are believed to leave the continent each year. That's 20,000, while others migrate to South Africa. This brain drain has caused problems in the health sector, which has failed to develop as it should. A brain drain means the loss of skilled workers and professionals. What's more, when you consider all those children left while their mothers work overseas, there has to be a social cost. Now I'd like to look at the issue of choice in migration. Many people believe that individuals have the right to choose to seek a better life in a new country. This is a rights-based approach to migration. However, the truth is that many people do not have a choice at all. Extreme poverty, for example, forces many people to leave their countries in desperation rather than making a calm choice. In a speech about migration, the United Nations Secretary General, Ban Ki-moon, referred to the push of danger or despair. Also, the head of the United Nations Refugee Agency has acknowledged that not all economic migration is voluntary. For example, the total economic collapse in Zimbabwe in 2008, along with political violence, left vast numbers of people with little choice but to flee to South Africa and other neighbouring countries. The impact of climate change creates a new risk of forced migration. The United Nations University warns that there may be 200 million environmental refugees by 2050. In fact, the greatest concern is focused on Bangladesh and small island states. Now, unfortunately, the developed countries of the world who will suffer the least from climate change are not taking responsibility, and this is sure to be a problem in the future. So, today we've looked at global trends in migration. We've seen that although most migrants migrate to richer countries, a third migrate from one developing country to another. We've also seen that in some Asian countries, a surprisingly high percentage of the population are abroad as migrant workers. We've also looked at some of the reasons why people become migrant workers and also briefly looked at some of the benefits and losses of migration. We've touched briefly on the issue of choice and that in fact, often danger and despair drive migration rather than choice. The issue of migration is one that affects most countries, and it is one of the key issues that needs to be analysed and addressed by the international community. So, that brings me to the end of the lecture. Are there any questions?